Have you ever wondered why some companies just seem to conquer the world while others, with what look like amazing products, just completely fail? Well, the answer isn't just about having a good strategy. It's about having the right kind of global strategy. Let's break down what that really means.
Okay, picture this. You've got two huge, successful companies. They both decide it's time to go global. They're both leaders in their home markets, and they both think they have a winning playbook.
So the first company makes its big move into a massive new market, and it just hits a brick wall. For more than 30 years, they poured money, time, and effort into it, but they just could not get any real momentum. It was just this slow, painful grind.
But then you have the second company. Totally different industry, also expanding. Their story? It's the complete opposite. They become one of the biggest players in the entire world, dominating markets that are thousands of miles from home. So, what was the difference?
Well, the difference really comes down to this common and frankly dangerous myth. We tend to think that global expansion is a straight line. You just copy and paste what works at home and boom, success. But the reality is so much messier. It's a fractured path full of hidden barriers you just don't see coming.
And this is the assumption that just sinks so many companies. It's that little voice that says, hey, if our product is a hit here, of course it's going to be a hit everywhere. It feels so logical, but it's fundamentally wrong.
And here's why. The world is just not as flat or as similar as we like to imagine. And all those differences, the ones we often just brush aside, are exactly what create huge risks for businesses trying to go international.
So the key here is we have to completely redefine what we mean by distance. It is not about the miles on a map. No, it's about all of those less obvious, hidden differences that exist between any two countries.
And this brings us to a really brilliant tool for understanding this, the CAGE framework. It breaks distance down into 4 key types. You've got cultural distance, so how people live, what they like. Administrative distance, that's all the political and legal stuff. Geographic distance, which isn't just miles, but also logistics. And finally, economic distance, the gaps in wealth and infrastructure.
Okay, so let's see how this actually plays out in the real world. With our two companies, the Italian coffee giant Lavazza and the Mexican cement producer CEMEX.
First up, the story of failure. Lavazza, Italy's favorite coffee, this is a brand that's synonymous with quality. They decided it was time to take on the massive U.S. coffee market. And they just struggled. For over 3 decades. Despite being a global powerhouse, they couldn't even crack 2% of the U.S. market. It was a strategic nightmare, a total failure to connect with the American coffee drinker.
So what on earth went wrong? Well, the biggest issue was a huge cultural distance. Lavazza's whole identity was built around small, intense, high-quality espresso. But back then, American coffee culture was all about giant mugs of drip coffee and sweet, flavored drinks. It was a complete product-market mismatch.
And this cultural gap just pushed them into a strategic trap. They couldn't go head-to-head with Starbucks' premium experience because they didn't have their own cafes. The geographic distance meant their coffee, which was roasted back in Italy, just wasn't as fresh as local brands. And they weren't cheap enough to compete with the big guys like Folgers. They were completely stuck in the middle.
All right, now let's flip the script completely and look at the success story, CEMEX, a cement company out of Mexico. On the surface, you'd think their product would be way harder to sell globally than coffee, right? But CEMEX had this one brilliant insight. They knew that cement is heavy and has a low value, which makes it awful to export. So they didn't export the product. They exported a capability. They exported their world-class expertise in running cement plants super efficiently.
And their strategy was so smart, so methodical. They started in markets that were close in CAGE distance, places like the US, Spain, Venezuela. They'd buy up inefficient local companies, install their super effective operational processes. They even called it the CEMEX way, and then use that as a launchpad to expand even further. They learned as they went.
So here it is. Here's the critical difference. Lavazza tried to fight distance. They shoved a culturally specific product into a market that just wasn't interested, totally ignoring those deep cultural and geographic barriers.
CEMEX, on the other hand, they used distance. They looked at the economic distance, those inefficient plants in other countries, and saw a massive opportunity. Their entire global strategy was built around exploiting that difference.
And that brings us to the real lesson here. A great global strategy isn't about just copying what worked for you back home. It's about deeply understanding and then strategically managing the differences between countries.
So how do you actually do that?
Well, it really comes down to making one of three big strategic choices for how you're going to handle the distances you're facing.
Okay, first, you can choose to adapt. You change your model to fit the local market, which is what Lavazza eventually had to start doing. Second, you can aggregate. You standardize across different regions to get economies of scale. Or third, you can use arbitrage, just like CEMEX did, by taking advantage of differences in costs or know-how between markets.
You can choose any of these, you can even mix them, but the one thing you absolutely cannot do is just ignore distance. That, right there, is the single most common reason for failure in global expansion.
Because when it all comes down to it, the companies that really win on the world stage, they're not the ones who just assume every new market is going to be just like their home turf.
No, they win because they see the world for exactly what it is, full of complex, challenging, but also exploitable differences. And they build a brilliant strategy specifically designed to navigate it.